In Maplewood, a store clerk refuses to sell Christmas gifts to a black woman, unaware she's the town's mayor. The incident sparks a reckoning, leading the town to confront prejudice and embrace change during the holiday season. The town of Maplewood came alive every December with the spirit of Christmas. Garlands lined the lampposts, twinkling lights crisscrossed Main Street, and the air smelled of fresh snow and roasted chestnuts from the vendor carts scattered along the sidewalks. Families crowded the shops, their laughter mixing with the cheerful carols that played from hidden speakers. At the center of the hustle and bustle was Maplewood Emporium, the town's largest department store. Its towering window displays were legendary, with animatronic elves hammering toy trains and reindeer prancing through faux snow. Inside, the store was a maze of holiday chaos. Rows of gift-wrapped packages, glittering ornaments dangling from the ceiling, and shelves brimming with toys, clothes, and gadgets. Shoppers darted between aisles, their carts overflowing with treasures for loved ones. Lisa Thompson, a middle-aged sales clerk, stood behind the register at the store's upscale boutique section. Her holiday spirit had worn thin long before December arrived. She'd been working at the Emporium for 5 years and considered herself a realist. The holidays, to Lisa, weren't about joy or togetherness. They were about grueling hours, endless demands, and entitled customers. She forced a tight smile as she rang up yet another expensive scarf for an elderly couple. "That'll be $85.99, she said, her tone clipped. "Thank you, dear," the woman replied, beaming as she handed over her credit card. Lisa barely acknowledged the pleasantries. She had more important things to focus on, like keeping her section running smoothly and keeping an eye out for anyone who might cause trouble. Across town, Eleanor Carter stepped out of her sleek black SUV. The bitter December wind bit at her cheeks, but she barely noticed. She adjusted the lapel of her long wool coat, her polished leather boots clicking against the sidewalk as she approached Maplewood Emporium. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had worked hard to earn her place in the world. Eleanor had lived in Maplewood for 10 years, moving to the town after accepting a position at a nearby law firm. Over the years, she had become a well-known figure in the community. Her intelligence, charisma, and dedication to public service had earned her widespread respect, culminating in her election as mayor 2 years ago. She was Maplewood's first black mayor, a milestone that was celebrated by some and met with quiet resistance by others. Today, however, Eleanor wasn't thinking about politics. She was on a mission to finish her Christmas shopping. Between town meetings, charity events, and her family commitments, this was her only chance to pick up gifts for her nieces and nephews. She had a list tucked into her pocket and a determined glint in her eye as she entered the Emporium. Inside the store, the atmosphere was as overwhelming as she had expected. Eleanor weaved through the crowd, dodging shopping carts and frantic parents, as she made her way to the boutique section. She scanned the shelves with practiced efficiency, selecting a silk tie for her brother-in-law, a set of scented candles for her sister, and a pair of limited-edition sneakers for her nephew. As she approached the counter, her arms laden with carefully chosen items, she noticed Lisa behind the register. The clerk was busy straightening a rack of scarves, her sharp eyes darting over the crowd. Eleanor offered her a warm smile as she set her items on the counter. "Good afternoon," Eleanor said. "I'm ready to check out." Lisa turned, her forced smile faltering slightly as her gaze landed on Eleanor. She sized her up quickly. Her tailored coat, her expensive-looking boots, her confident posture. But despite Eleanor's polished appearance, something about her skin color and the way she carried herself made Lisa's biases stir. Lisa's voice cooled noticeably as she began scanning the items. "These are all final sale, you know," she said. "No refunds or exchanges." "That's fine," Eleanor replied, unfazed. "They're gifts." Lisa raised an eyebrow but continued scanning. "These sneakers are limited edition," she added. "They're not cheap." "I'm aware," Eleanor said, her tone steady. "That's why I'm buying them." Lisa pressed her lips together, irritation flickering in her expression. "Do you want me to check the price for you first?" "They're $275. Eleanor met her gaze calmly. That won't be necessary. Please continue. Lisa hesitated, her fingers hovering over the register. She felt a strange mixture of discomfort and defiance as she glanced at the crowd around her. Most of the customers were white, many of them casting curious glances toward the interaction. A part of Lisa relished the idea of asserting her authority in her section, of reminding this woman that not everyone would cater to her. Actually, Lisa said, her voice stiff, I'm going to need to see some ID before I ring this up. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? It's store policy, Lisa lied, for high-ticket items like these. Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly, but she remained composed. I wasn't asked for ID the last time I shopped here. Well, Lisa said, straightening her posture. Policies change. If you don't have ID, I'm afraid I can't sell these to you. The tension in the air was palpable now. Several shoppers paused mid-browse, their eyes flicking toward the counter. Eleanor's jaw tightened, but she refused to let her frustration show. Do you ask everyone for ID, or just me? She asked evenly. Lisa's cheeks flushed. I ask when it's necessary. Eleanor stared at her for a long moment, her calm exterior masking the storm of emotions inside. She knew what this was, had seen it 100 times before, in subtle and not-so-subtle ways. She considered pressing further, demanding to speak to a manager, but she also knew the power of patience. She placed her hands on the counter, leaning in slightly. I'd like you to remember this moment, Miss Thompson, she said softly, because so will I. Before Lisa could respond, Eleanor picked up her purse and walked out of the store, leaving the carefully selected gifts behind. The crowd around her parted, some watching her leave with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort, others averting their eyes entirely. Lisa exhaled sharply, her tension dissolving into smug satisfaction. Some people just can't handle rules, she muttered under her breath. Outside, Eleanor climbed back into her SUV and sat in silence for a moment. The anger she had held at bay now simmered just beneath the surface, but she forced herself to breathe deeply. She had faced worse than this and would undoubtedly face it again. But that didn't make it any easier. She reached into her coat pocket, pulling out her phone. A quick photo of the store's entrance and a brief caption were all it took. A friendly reminder that racism doesn't take holidays off. Here's what happened to me while trying to buy Christmas gifts today at Maplewood Emporium. With a tap, the post went live. The post Eleanor Carter made outside Maplewood Emporium spread faster than she anticipated. Within hours, her phone buzzed constantly with notifications. Likes, shares, and comments flooded in from her friends, colleagues, and even strangers who resonated with her experience. Unacceptable. This is why we need to speak up. Stay strong, Madam Mayor. You're making a difference. Let us know how we can help. This can't keep happening. By the next morning, her story had taken on a life of its own. Several local media outlets picked it up, framing the incident as a larger conversation about discrimination in small-town businesses. While Eleanor appreciated the outpouring of support, she hadn't intended to create a spectacle. Her goal was simple: to hold Maplewood Emporium accountable and ensure no one else endured the humiliation she had. Meanwhile, inside the store, Lisa Thompson remained blissfully unaware of the brewing storm. She arrived for her shift the next morning. Her mood improved after what she saw as a small victory the previous day. As she arranged a display of scarves, she noticed her coworkers whispering in the corner, their heads bent over their phones. What's going on? Lisa asked, her tone sharp. One of the younger clerks, Kelly, looked up nervously. Nothing. Just something on Facebook. Lisa narrowed her eyes. Well, stop gossiping and get back to work. Kelly hesitated before stepping closer. Actually, Ms. Thompson, you should probably see this. She held out her phone, the screen displaying Eleanor Carter's post. Lisa's stomach tightened as she scanned the caption. Her name conspicuously absent, but her actions unmistakably described. The accompanying comments sent a wave of unease through her. That's unacceptable. People like this shouldn't be working with the public. Fire her. Period. Businesses need to be held accountable for their employees' actions. Lisa handed the phone back quickly, her palms sweating. "This is nonsense," she snapped. "Just someone trying to stir up trouble." Kelly stepped back, her expression cautious. "She's the mayor." "So what?" Lisa barked. "That doesn't give her the right to smear me all over the internet." But as Lisa returned to her station, the reality began to sink in. People were talking about her, about the store, about what had happened. Her chest tightened as she thought about what might happen if her manager, Richard, got wind of this. She prided herself on being a model employee, someone who followed the rules and kept things running smoothly. Surely he would take her side. Wouldn't he? Later that morning, Eleanor stepped into her office at City Hall, her expression calm but purposeful. She greeted her assistant, Sophia, with a nod before setting her purse on her desk. "Morning, Madam Mayor," Sophia said. "I saw your post last night. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Eleanor replied, though her voice was tight. "But I'm not letting this slide." Sophia nodded, her admiration evident. "The community's behind you. Everyone's talking about it." Eleanor sighed, pulling out her planner. "I'm not interested in attention for attention's sake, Sophia. This is bigger than me. If someone like me, an elected official, can be treated like this, imagine what other people go through every day." Sophia's brow furrowed. "So what's the plan?" Eleanor leaned forward, her gaze steady. "The plan is to make sure this never happens again. Not at Maplewood Emporium, not anywhere." Back at the store, the tension was palpable as Richard, the owner of Maplewood Emporium, arrived for a meeting with Lisa. He had been inundated with calls and emails all morning, each one more urgent than the last. Customers threatened to boycott, reporters requested interviews, and local advocacy groups demanded accountability. Richard entered the break room where Lisa sat, her posture defensive. She stood quickly, smoothing her uniform. "Richard, this whole thing is being blown out of proportion." "Sit down," Richard interrupted, his tone sharp. Lisa hesitated before sinking back into the chair. Richard remained standing, his arms crossed over his chest. "Do you have any idea what kind of damage you've caused?" Lisa opened her mouth to respond, but Richard held up a hand. "I've been fielding calls all morning, Lisa. From customers, from reporters, even from the mayor's office. This isn't just about you. This is about the store's reputation. And right now, it's in the gutter." "I was just following policy," Lisa said quickly. She didn't have ID for a high-ticket item. "I was doing my job." Richard's eyes narrowed. "Don't insult me. There is no policy requiring ID for sneakers. You made that up." Lisa flushed. "Well, I thought it was appropriate in the moment." "No, you thought it was appropriate because you didn't think someone like her belonged in this section," Richard shot back. "And now we're all paying the price." Lisa bristled, her indignation flaring. "You're taking her side? She's just playing the victim." "Enough," Richard snapped. "This isn't about sides. This is about fixing the mess you created. You're suspended until further notice. Go home." Lisa's jaw dropped. "Suspended? Are you kidding me? Do I look like I'm kidding?" Richard said, his voice cold. "Leave. Now." Lisa stormed out of the break room, her face burning with humiliation and anger. As she grabbed her coat and left the store, she could feel the eyes of her co-workers following her, their judgment hanging in the air like a cloud. That evening, Eleanor attended a community forum at the local library. She had been invited to speak about her experience, but she made it clear that the discussion wasn't about personal grievances. It was about creating systemic change. "We can't ignore these moments," Eleanor said, her voice steady but impassioned, "because they don't happen in isolation. They're part of a larger pattern that affects people of color every day, in ways big and small. It's not enough to say, 'That's just the way things are.' We have to challenge it." The audience, a mix of community members, nodded and murmured in agreement. Among them was Richard, who had come to hear Eleanor's perspective firsthand. He sat in the back, his arms folded, his expression thoughtful. After the forum ended, Richard approached Eleanor as she gathered her things. "Mayor Carter," he said, his tone hesitant. Eleanor looked up, her gaze cool but professional. "Mr. Reynolds," she replied. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I came to listen," he said, "and to apologize. What happened at my store was unacceptable." Eleanor studied him for a moment before nodding. "I appreciate that, but apologies aren't enough. What are you going to do to ensure it doesn't happen again?" Richard straightened, his expression firm. "We're implementing mandatory training for all employees, effective immediately. And Lisa Thompson has been suspended while we review her actions." Eleanor's lips curved into a faint smile. "That's a start." By the time the sun rose the next morning, Eleanor Carter's experience at Maplewood Emporium had become the talk of the town and beyond. Social media was ablaze with discussions, with Eleanor's post at the center of it all. The local newspaper published an editorial condemning the incident, and the town radio station aired segments where callers voiced their support for Eleanor or vented frustration about the store's reputation. For Maplewood, a town that prided itself on small-town charm and community spirit, the incident felt like a stain on its carefully curated image. And for the black residents of the town, it was an all-too-familiar reminder of the subtle and overt prejudices they navigated daily. Eleanor spent the day balancing her duties as mayor with responding to the avalanche of messages and media requests. While some of the attention was supportive, others were less kind. Anonymous emails accused her of exaggerating the event for political gain, and a few even outright denied that racism could exist in a place like Maplewood. Sophia, her assistant, entered her office mid-morning with a stack of mail and a concerned expression. "Madam Mayor, these just came in," she said, setting the pile on Eleanor's desk. A mix of support and, well, not support. Eleanor flipped through the letters. One caught her eye, a hand-scrawled note on lined paper that read, "Stop stirring up trouble. If you don't like it here, you can leave." She sighed, her jaw tightening, and placed it aside. Sophia frowned. "Do you want me to report it?" Eleanor shook her head. "No, I've seen worse. This isn't about me. It's about the people in this town who don't have the same platform to speak up." Sophia hesitated, then nodded. "If anyone can turn this into something meaningful, it's you." Eleanor offered a small smile. "That's the plan." Across Maplewood, the incident sparked conversations in every corner of the town. At the local diner, a group of black residents gathered over coffee and pancakes, their voices tinged with frustration. "It's not just about her being the mayor," said Danielle, a middle-aged teacher. "If this can happen to someone with her status, imagine what happens to the rest of us." Her friend Marcus, a retired postal worker, nodded. "Exactly. You think I haven't been followed around in that store before? They act like we're guilty until proven innocent." The group murmured in agreement, their shared experiences weaving a tapestry of long-held grievances. For many, Eleanor's post was a rallying cry, a chance to confront what had been ignored for too long. But not everyone in town was as eager for change. At a hardware store on the edge of Main Street, a group of white residents debated the issue with a different tone. "People are blowing this way out of proportion," grumbled Tom, a contractor. "It's not like the clerk threw her out. She just asked for ID." "That's the problem, Tom," argued his coworker Sarah. "She didn't ask anyone else for ID. That's discrimination, plain and simple." Tom scoffed. "Or maybe the clerk was just being careful. You can't trust everyone, you know?" Sarah rolled her eyes, but the argument continued, echoing the broader divide that had taken root in Maplewood. Lisa Thompson sat in her small apartment, the curtains drawn tightly against the daylight. Her phone buzzed constantly, but she ignored it. The few times she had dared to check, the messages left her stomach in knots. How could you do that to her? You're a disgrace. This is why people hate this town. Lisa's suspension had been a humiliating blow, and the backlash online only deepened her resentment. She saw herself as a victim of overreaction, a hard-working woman who had been unfairly targeted for doing her job. "This is ridiculous," she muttered to herself, pacing the living room. "I didn't do anything wrong." But as the hours passed, Lisa found it harder to escape the growing awareness of what her actions had triggered. News outlets were covering the story, and her name was being whispered in every corner of Maplewood. She turned on the TV, only to see a local anchor discussing Eleanor's post with a panel of guests. "This incident speaks to a larger issue," one guest said. "It's not just about this one clerk. It's about the biases that permeate our society. People of color, especially Black women, are often treated with suspicion or hostility in spaces where they should feel welcome." Lisa turned off the TV with a scowl, but the words lingered. At Maplewood Emporium, Richard Reynolds was facing one of the most challenging weeks of his career. As the store's owner, he had built his business on the promise of providing excellent service to everyone who walked through its doors. Now, that promise felt like a cruel irony. Richard sat at his desk, drafting a statement to address the controversy. His assistant, Melanie, stood nearby, her clipboard in hand. "Are we releasing this today?" Melanie asked, glancing at the draft. Richard nodded. "We have to. The longer we stay silent, the worse this gets." The statement was carefully worded. An apology to Eleanor Carter, a commitment to better training, and a promise to rebuild trust with the community. Richard read it aloud, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "We should also prepare for a press conference," Melanie suggested. "People will want to hear directly from you." Richard sighed, rubbing his temples. "Fine, let's schedule it for tomorrow." While the town buzzed with speculation and debate, Eleanor kept her focus on the bigger picture. She reached out to community leaders, advocacy groups, and local churches to organize a forum on racial bias in public spaces. Her goal wasn't just to address what had happened to her, but to create a platform for others to share their stories. "We can't change what we don't acknowledge," Eleanor said during a planning meeting. "This isn't about pointing fingers. It's about finding solutions." As the forum gained traction, Eleanor felt a sense of purpose taking shape. The pain of her experience at the store was real, but it was also a catalyst for something larger. She hoped that by turning her frustration into action, she could inspire others to do the same. By the end of the week, the tension in Maplewood had reached a boiling point. The upcoming forum loomed large, and the town seemed split between those who supported Eleanor's efforts and those who viewed them as unnecessary drama. At the heart of it all was Lisa Thompson, who found herself increasingly isolated. Her initial defensiveness began to waver as she watched the fallout unfold. She couldn't ignore the impact of her actions, not just on Eleanor but on the entire town. One evening, as Lisa sat alone in her apartment, she opened her laptop and typed "unconscious bias training" into the search bar. It was a small step, but it was the first real acknowledgement that something within her needed to change. The Maplewood Emporium was unusually quiet the next morning, the festive decorations hanging limply as though weighed down by the tension. Outside, a podium had been set up near the store's entrance, surrounded by reporters and onlookers bundled in scarves and coats. Richard Reynolds, the store's owner, stood behind the podium, clutching a prepared statement. His normally confident demeanor was replaced with a tight expression of unease. Eleanor Carter watched from the edge of the crowd, her arms crossed over her tailored coat. She wasn't here for theatrics. She had seen enough hollow apologies to recognize one from a mile away. Instead, she was here to hold Richard and his business accountable, not just for her experience but for the environment that had allowed it to happen in the first place. Richard adjusted the microphone, clearing his throat as the murmuring crowd fell silent. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady but tense. "First, I want to thank Mayor Carter for being here today. Her presence speaks to the importance of what we're about to discuss." He glanced down at his notes, taking a deep breath. "Last week, a deeply regrettable incident occurred in our store, and it involved one of our employees and Mayor Carter. As the owner of Maplewood Emporium, I take full responsibility for what happened. Discrimination of any kind has no place in this store, and we failed to uphold the values we claim to stand for." The crowd murmured softly, some nodding in agreement while others looked skeptical. Richard continued, "I want to publicly apologize to Mayor Carter for the disrespect she experienced, and to the entire community for the pain this incident has caused. We have already taken steps to address this, including placing the employee involved on leave and implementing mandatory unconscious bias training for all staff. Eleanor's expression remained unreadable as Richard spoke. While his words were polished, she knew that real change required more than promises made under public scrutiny. Still, the apology was a start. Inside her small apartment, Lisa Thompson sat at her kitchen table, watching the press conference on her laptop. Her coffee sat untouched, the steam curling into the air as Richard's words washed over her. "We failed to uphold the values we claim to stand for." Lisa's stomach churned. She had spent the last week vacillating between anger and shame, but hearing Richard's apology made it impossible to ignore the weight of her actions. She had expected the store to defend her, to chalk up the incident to a misunderstanding. Instead, they had turned the spotlight on her shortcomings, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she debated whether to send an email she had drafted the night before. In it, she had written a brief but heartfelt apology to Eleanor, hoping to convey a sincerity she wasn't sure she fully felt yet. "Dear Mayor Carter," the draft began, "I want to express my deepest apologies for my behavior last week. I was wrong, and I realize now how my actions hurt you and others who witnessed it." Lisa hesitated, her finger poised over the send button, but she couldn't bring herself to press it. Not yet. That evening, the community forum organized by Eleanor took place in the local library's auditorium. The space was packed with residents, some eager to participate and others there out of curiosity. The crowd was notably diverse, reflecting the broad spectrum of Maplewood's population. Eleanor stood at the front of the room, her calm yet commanding presence drawing everyone's attention. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began. The incident at Maplewood Emporium was not unique. It was a symptom of something larger, something that affects people of color, particularly Black people, in spaces that should be open to everyone. She paused, scanning the room. "This forum isn't just about what happened to me. It's about listening to each other, sharing experiences, and finding ways to move forward as a community." The first speaker, an older Black man named Charles, stood and recounted a time when he'd been followed around the Emporium years ago. "They didn't say anything, but I knew what it was about," he said, his voice tinged with weariness. "I shouldn't have to feel like a criminal just because I'm shopping." A young mother named Jasmine shared a similar experience, describing how a clerk had hovered over her while she browsed baby clothes. "It's humiliating," she said, her voice cracking. "I almost stopped shopping there altogether." As more people spoke, a pattern emerged. A pattern of subtle but pervasive bias that many white residents admitted they hadn't noticed before. Lisa sat in the back of the auditorium, her head bowed as she listened to the stories being shared. She hadn't planned to attend but found herself drawn to the event out of curiosity and guilt. Each account felt like a mirror reflecting her own behavior, forcing her to confront the uncomfortable truth she had spent years ignoring. When the forum ended, Lisa lingered near the exit, unsure whether to approach Eleanor. As the crowd began to thin, she saw Eleanor speaking with a group of attendees, her expression warm and attentive. Summoning her courage, Lisa stepped forward. "Mayor Carter," she said quietly, her voice trembling. Eleanor turned, her eyes narrowing slightly as she recognized Lisa. "Ms. Thompson," she said evenly. "What brings you here?" Lisa hesitated, her hands twisting nervously. I wanted to apologize for what I did, for how I treated you." Eleanor's gaze remained steady, giving nothing away. "Why now?" Lisa swallowed hard. "Because I've realized how wrong I was. I let my biases get in the way, and I hurt you. I hurt the community. I'm sorry." The room seemed to grow quieter as Eleanor studied her. Finally, she nodded. "Acknowledging the harm you caused is a start, Ms. Thompson. But an apology is only the beginning. Change takes action." Lisa nodded quickly, relief flooding her expression. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." In the days that followed, Maplewood began to shift in subtle but meaningful ways. The Emporium implemented the promised training sessions, and Richard invited local diversity advocates to help shape new policies. Eleanor continued to use her platform to foster dialogue, working with community leaders to address broader issues of bias and inequality. For Lisa, the journey was more personal. She attended every training session, volunteered for local charities, and began seeking out stories and perspectives she had long ignored. While some residents were skeptical of her efforts, others saw her genuine desire to grow. One snowy afternoon, Lisa stepped into City Hall and handed Eleanor a handwritten note. "Thank you for giving me the chance to do better. I'm still learning, but I won't stop trying." Eleanor read the note and looked up, her expression softening. "Keep going," she said simply. In the weeks following the forum, Maplewood began to shift in ways that felt both overdue and promising. Conversations about race and bias, once whispered or avoided altogether, were now openly discussed in classrooms, churches, and community gatherings. For the first time in years, many residents began to reflect on how their own actions or inactions shaped the experiences of their neighbors. Eleanor, steadfast in her role as mayor, saw these changes with cautious optimism. She knew systemic issues couldn't be solved overnight, but every story shared, every hard conversation started, was a step in the right direction. She committed herself to the work, speaking with local organizations, encouraging inclusive hiring practices in businesses, and proposing diversity education initiatives for the town council to consider. Meanwhile, Lisa Thompson found herself at a crossroads. Her suspension from Maplewood Emporium had given her ample time to reflect on the choices that led her here. Days that once began with routine work shifts now started with uncertainty and self-examination. She'd signed up for unconscious bias training at a nearby center and spent evenings attending workshops that challenged her long-held assumptions. The first workshop she attended focused on microaggressions, small, subtle behaviors or comments that perpetuate stereotypes. Listening to the experiences of others, Lisa felt a knot of shame tighten in her chest. One participant, a young black woman, shared how clerks followed her in stores, questioning her ability to pay or assuming she couldn't afford higher-end items. Lisa didn't need to guess how those interactions felt. She had played a role in creating one. The realization didn't just unsettle her, it spurred her into action. Lisa began volunteering with local community groups that worked to bridge gaps of understanding. She joined a mentorship program for young adults looking to enter the workforce, many of whom shared stories of being dismissed or underestimated because of their race. These interactions, while humbling, gave her a deeper appreciation for perspectives she had ignored. One Saturday, while helping sort donated winter coats, she met Marcus, a retired teacher who had spoken at the forum. He recognized her immediately but extended a quiet olive branch. "I'm glad to see you here," Marcus said. "It's not easy facing the parts of yourself you'd rather not see." Lisa nodded. "It's not easy realizing you've been part of the problem. It's harder to do nothing after you realize it," Marcus replied. His words stayed with her as she continued to rebuild herself, piece by piece. At the Emporium, Richard wasted no time implementing the changes he promised. Employees attended training sessions led by diversity consultants who guided them through role-playing exercises and case studies. Richard also introduced new hiring practices, reaching out to local organizations to ensure the store's workforce better reflected the community it served. When Lisa's suspension ended, Richard called her into his office. He was firm but fair, outlining the conditions of her return. She would not only complete the training but also participate in the mentorship program she had begun volunteering for. "People will be watching," he said. "You need to show them you've changed, not just say it." Lisa agreed. Returning to the store felt both daunting and redemptive. Some co-workers welcomed her back cautiously, while others kept their distance, unsure if her change was genuine. Lisa accepted this without complaint, determined to let her actions speak louder than words. As Christmas approached, Eleanor turned her focus to planning the town's annual holiday celebration. The event, traditionally held in the town square, was an opportunity for residents to come together and celebrate the season. This year, she envisioned it as something more, a chance to emphasize unity and shared purpose. She worked with the planning committee to incorporate elements that reflected Maplewood's diversity. A local gospel choir would perform alongside the school band. Vendors from all backgrounds were invited to showcase their goods. For the first time, The event would include a candle lighting ceremony, symbolizing the light that every person brings to the community. Lisa volunteered to help organize the event, unsure how Eleanor would react to her involvement. When she approached Eleanor during one of the planning sessions, the mayor looked up from her notes, her expression neutral. "I want to help," Lisa said. "I know I haven't earned your trust yet, but I want to try." Eleanor considered her for a moment before nodding. "We could use help setting up the vendor booths." Lisa smiled faintly. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The day of the celebration arrived, bringing with it a fresh snowfall that blanketed the town square in white. Families poured in from all directions, their breath visible in the cold air as they explored the booths, sipped hot cocoa, and listened to the carolers. The gospel choir's rendition of Silent Night brought tears to more than a few eyes, their voices soaring through the crisp winter night. Lisa worked quietly, helping vendors and ensuring the event ran smoothly. She felt a mix of pride and trepidation, knowing some people still viewed her with skepticism. When Marcus passed her a cup of coffee, she accepted it gratefully. "Good work tonight," he said. "You're showing up, and that matters." Lisa nodded, the weight of his words settling in her chest. As the evening drew to a close, Eleanor stood on the steps of the town hall, addressing the crowd gathered in the square. The candles in their hands flickered softly, casting a warm glow over their faces. "This season is about more than gifts and decorations," she began. "It's about connection. It's about looking at each other, not just with our eyes, but with our hearts, and recognizing the light we all carry. Tonight, I see a town that is willing to grow, willing to listen, and willing to stand together." The crowd erupted into applause, the sound echoing through the square. Eleanor stepped down from the podium, weaving through the crowd to thank the volunteers who had made the event possible. When she reached Lisa, she paused. "You've done a lot of work," Eleanor said, her tone measured but not unkind. Lisa met her gaze, her voice steady. "I still have a lot more to do." Eleanor extended her hand. "Keep going." Lisa shook it, a small smile breaking across her face. "I will." As the final carolers sang and the last candles flickered out, Maplewood felt a little different. Less divided, more connected. It wasn't perfect and the work was far from over, but the change was real. For Lisa, the evening marked not an end but a beginning. A commitment to continue showing up, learning, and rebuilding trust. For Eleanor, it was a reminder of why she fought so hard for her community. Change, she knew, wasn't easy, but it was possible. And tonight, under the glow of the holiday lights, Maplewood seemed ready to embrace it. The weeks following Maplewood's holiday celebration brought a sense of cautious optimism to the town. The conversations sparked by Eleanor's leadership and the changes at Maplewood Emporium began to take root in unexpected ways. Businesses started revising their practices, schools incorporated lessons on diversity into their curriculums, and neighbors who had never exchanged more than a polite nod began having deeper conversations. For Lisa Thompson, every day was a step forward in what she realized would be a lifelong journey. The workshops she attended and the stories she heard gave her an understanding she had long lacked. But it wasn't just about listening. It was about action. Lisa's determination to change wasn't born from public pressure. It came from the realization that she had the power to be better, to make her corner of the world more just. Lisa's return to Maplewood Emporium was unremarkable at first. Her co-workers were cordial but distant, unsure of whether her apology and efforts to change were genuine. She couldn't blame them. Trust wasn't something that could be demanded, it had to be earned. On her second day back, Lisa noticed Jasmine, the young mother who had spoken at the forum about her experiences being followed in stores. She was browsing in the baby section, her toddler in tow. Lisa felt a pang of guilt as she remembered Jasmine's story. Though she hadn't been the clerk Jasmine mentioned, Lisa had no doubt she'd made other customers feel similarly unwelcome. Summoning her courage, Lisa approached Jasmine with a warm smile. "Excuse me," she said. "Do you need help finding anything?" Jasmine glanced at her, recognition flickering across her face. "No, thank you," she said politely but coolly. Lisa hesitated, then said, I wanted to thank you for sharing your story at the forum. It was hard to hear, but it opened my eyes to a lot of things I didn't realize before. Jasmine regarded her for a moment, her expression softening slightly. I hope you keep learning, she said, because people like me can't afford to stop teaching. Lisa nodded, her chest tightening with the weight of those words. I will, she promised. Meanwhile, Eleanor continued her work as mayor with renewed focus. The success of the holiday celebration had strengthened her resolve to create lasting change in Maplewood. She proposed a new initiative to the town council, the Maplewood Inclusion Alliance, a program designed to foster understanding and unity through workshops, town hall discussions, and community projects. This isn't just about addressing one incident, Eleanor told the council during a meeting. It's about creating a culture where everyone feels valued and respected. We owe that to each other. The council voted unanimously to support the initiative, and Eleanor wasted no time getting it off the ground. She partnered with local leaders, including Marcus and other advocates, to design programming that would resonate with Maplewood's diverse population. One of the first events was a storytelling evening held at the library, where residents were invited to share their experiences of belonging, or lack thereof, in the town. Eleanor encouraged Lisa to attend, knowing it would be another step in her journey. When Lisa arrived at the library, she felt a knot of anxiety in her stomach. She recognized many faces from the holiday celebration and the forum, but this was the first time she had participated in an event like this. As she took a seat in the back, she wondered if she belonged here, if she deserved to be part of these conversations. The evening began with Marcus, who shared a poignant story about his early years in Maplewood, when he and his wife were one of the few black families in town. He described the subtle exclusions they faced, from being ignored at restaurants to receiving fewer opportunities at work. It wasn't always outright hostility, Marcus said, his voice steady but emotional. It was the constant reminders that we didn't fully belong, that wears you down over time. One by one, others stood to share their stories. Jasmine spoke about her struggles raising a mixed-race child in a predominantly white town. A young Latino man recounted his challenges navigating school as the son of immigrants. Each story peeled back another layer of Maplewood's identity, revealing the gaps between its reputation and its reality. When the facilitator invited others to speak, Lisa hesitated. She wasn't sure her voice belonged in a space meant for those who had been marginalized. But as she listened, she realized that staying silent wasn't an option. She stood slowly, her hands trembling slightly. I don't know if it's my place to speak here, she began, her voice hesitant. But I want to thank everyone who has shared their stories tonight. Hearing them has made me realize how much I didn't see, how much I didn't want to see. She glanced at Marcus and Jasmine, who watched her with cautious but open expressions. I know I've been part of the problem, Lisa continued, and I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I'm here because I want to do better, and I'm willing to do the work. When she sat down, the room was quiet for a moment before someone began to clap. The applause grew, and while it wasn't unanimous, it was enough to let Lisa know she was on the right path. As the months passed, the changes in Maplewood became more tangible. The Inclusion Alliance hosted workshops on implicit bias, organized cultural festivals, and launched mentorship programs that paired young people from marginalized backgrounds with experienced professionals in town. Lisa became an active participant in these efforts, volunteering her time and resources to support the programs. She worked closely with Jasmine and Marcus, who, while initially skeptical, began to see her commitment as genuine. Together, they helped design a training program for local businesses, focusing on creating welcoming environments for all customers. One afternoon, as they finalized plans for the program, Jasmine turned to Lisa. You know, if someone had told me a year ago that we'd be working together on something like this, I wouldn't have believed them. Lisa smiled faintly. A year ago, I wouldn't have believed it either. Marcus chuckled. The important thing is we're here now. That's what matters. As December approached again, Eleanor and the planning committee prepared for the next holiday celebration. This year, they wanted to build on the success of the previous event by incorporating new traditions that reflected Maplewood's evolving identity. One idea came from Marcus, who suggested a community tree where residents could hang ornaments representing their personal stories. Each ornament would carry a brief note about the person who placed it there, creating a visual tapestry of Maplewood's diversity. The idea resonated deeply with Eleanor, and soon the town square was adorned with a towering evergreen, its branches slowly filling with ornaments as residents contributed their stories. Lisa brought an ornament shaped like a star, inscribed with the words, "Change starts with listening." On the night of the celebration, Eleanor stood beneath the tree, addressing the crowd once again. "This tree represents all of us," she said. "Every story, every experience, every voice. Together, we create something stronger and more beautiful than any of us could achieve alone." The crowd cheered, their candles casting a warm glow that seemed to reach the stars. As the celebration wound down, Lisa lingered by the tree, reading the notes attached to the ornaments. Each one told a story, some joyful, some painful, all deeply human. She thought about her own journey over the past year, the mistakes she had made, and the people who had given her the chance to grow. Jasmine approached her, holding her toddler's hand. "It's a beautiful tree," she said. "It really is," Lisa agreed. She hesitated, then added, "Thank you for giving me the chance to be part of this." Jasmine studied her for a moment before nodding. "You earned it." Lisa smiled, her heart full. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she truly belonged, not because she had asked for forgiveness, but because she had worked for it. A year after the incident at Maplewood Emporium, the town of Maplewood stood transformed in ways both small and profound. Snow blanketed the streets once again, garlands adorned lampposts, and the annual holiday celebration was just days away. But this year, something was different. The divisions that had quietly festered in the community seemed to have softened, replaced by a cautious optimism that perhaps, together, Maplewood could become something better. Eleanor Carter reflected on the past year as she sat in her office, the glow of holiday lights from the square illuminating her window. Being Maplewood's first black mayor had always carried challenges, but the events of the previous Christmas had shifted her role from political leader to a symbol of hope and resilience for many in the town. She had embraced that responsibility, though it had come with a cost. More scrutiny, more late nights, and more conversations that tested her patience and strength. Still, as she glanced at the folder of notes on her desk detailing the upcoming holiday celebration, Eleanor felt a quiet pride. The changes weren't perfect, but they were real. And this year, the town's celebration was designed to reflect those changes in every way possible. At Maplewood Emporium, Lisa Thompson stood near the entrance, greeting customers with a warm smile. Her uniform was the same, but everything about her demeanor had changed. Over the past year, Lisa had become one of the store's most attentive and empathetic employees. Customers noticed the difference. She greeted everyone equally, took time to help people find what they needed, and often went out of her way to ensure their shopping experience was a positive one. But her transformation extended beyond her job. Lisa had become deeply involved in the Maplewood Inclusion Alliance, attending every meeting and volunteering for nearly every initiative. She had also worked closely with Jasmine and Marcus to implement new training programs for local businesses. The training focused on addressing unconscious bias and creating welcoming spaces for all customers, and several businesses in Maplewood had already adopted the program. At first, some of the other volunteers had been skeptical of Lisa's involvement. Many questioned whether her efforts were genuine or simply an attempt to repair her reputation. But as the months passed, her consistency and humility began to win them over. "Actions speak louder than words," Marcus had told her during one of their many meetings, "and your actions are starting to say something worth listening to." Lisa carried those words with her, using them as a reminder that redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about building a better future. The town square buzzed with activity as volunteers worked to set up for the annual holiday celebration. Vendors arranged their booths, stringing lights and decorating their tables with festive displays. The centerpiece of the event, the community tree, stood tall in the center of the square, its branches already adorned with dozens of ornaments contributed by residents. Each ornament told a story, Some were simple, like a red bauble with the word love scrawled across it in silver glitter. Others were more personal, like the hand-carved wooden snowflake left by a family who had recently moved to Maplewood from Mexico, with a note that read, "Home is where we are welcome." Lisa arrived early to help arrange the remaining ornaments and prepare the space for the evening's events. As she worked, she couldn't help but reflect on the ornament she had contributed. A small, golden bell inscribed with the words, "Every step forward matters." She was hanging garlands along the railing of the town hall steps when Eleanor approached. The mayor's presence carried its usual authority, but her expression was warm. "Lisa," Eleanor said, stopping to admire the decorations. "You've done a beautiful job here." Lisa turned, surprised but grateful for the compliment. "Thank you, Mayor Carter. It's been a team effort." Eleanor nodded, her gaze steady. "It always is." There was a pause before Eleanor added, "I know this past year hasn't been easy for you, but I see the work you've put in, the consistency. That matters." Lisa swallowed, her throat tight with emotion. "I just want to make things right." "You're getting there," Eleanor said. "Keep going." As evening fell, the town square filled with residents bundled in coats and scarves. The air was thick with the scent of roasted chestnuts and hot cocoa, and the sound of carolers echoed through the streets. Children ran between booths, their laughter mingling with the hum of conversation. The highlight of the evening was the tree lighting ceremony, which had become a deeply symbolic moment for the town. This year, Eleanor had invited several residents to speak before the lighting, each representing a different aspect of Maplewood's evolving identity. Marcus was the first to step up to the podium. His voice, steady and rich with experience, carried over the crowd as he spoke about the importance of inclusion. "This tree behind me isn't just a decoration," Marcus said. "It's a reminder that every story matters. Every person here adds something unique to this community. And when we come together, we create something truly beautiful." Jasmine spoke next, sharing her journey of raising her son in a town that, while not perfect, had begun to make strides toward a better future. Her words were met with applause, her resilience a source of inspiration for many in the crowd. Finally, Eleanor stepped up, her presence commanding attention as the crowd quieted. She spoke about the progress the town had made over the past year and the work that still lay ahead. "Change is never easy," Eleanor said. "It requires courage, humility, and a willingness to listen. But here in Maplewood, we've proven that change is possible. Tonight, as we light this tree, let it remind us of the light we can bring to each other, even in the darkest times." As the applause faded and the crowd turned their attention to the tree, Lisa lingered near the edge of the square, her hands clasped tightly around a cup of cocoa. She felt both pride and nervousness as she watched the event unfold. This celebration wasn't about her, but she couldn't help feeling that her journey was tied to the broader changes the town had embraced. Jasmine approached her, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "You did good tonight." Lisa looked at her, surprised. "I didn't do anything. You showed up," Jasmine said simply. "Sometimes that's enough." Lisa nodded, her chest swelling with gratitude. For so long, she had felt like an outsider in her own community, a shadow of the person she wanted to be. But tonight, standing among neighbors who had once doubted her, she felt something new, belonging. As the tree lit up, its thousands of twinkling lights casting a warm glow over the square, the crowd erupted into cheers. Children clapped, couples embraced, and strangers exchanged smiles. The tree stood as a symbol of the town's resilience and the power of unity, a testament to the idea that even in the face of division, people could come together to create something beautiful. Eleanor stood at the base of the tree, her heart full as she took in the scene. She knew the work was far from over. There would always be challenges, always more to do. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment to celebrate what they had accomplished. Lisa watched from the edge of the crowd, her golden bell glinting among the branches of the tree. As she looked around at the faces of her neighbors, she felt a quiet determination settle over her. Redemption, she realized, wasn't a destination. It was a journey, and she was ready to keep walking.